Okay, if we could, let's go ahead and get started with the afternoon panel. We're going to do the same format as we used for the prior panel, where we'll give each of the panelists here about 5 minutes to talk, to make their introductory remarks, and then we'll open it up to the group for questions. My name is Jean-Marc Kramer. I was a student of Dr. Schultz, graduated in the year 2000. So let's go ahead and start on the left with Dr. Pursley. Dr. Pursley is a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Clemson University, where he holds the Holcomb Endowed Chair.
Thank you. Well, we're supposed to predict the future here, I guess, which is always difficult to do. So let me start with talking about the past. For those of us who have had our degrees for a few decades, we've seen that research in communication theory, information theory, and coding has had multiple deaths, each time only to be reborn. And perhaps the comparison with the cats with 9 lives is not quite right, because it seems like communication theory, information theory, and coding have already gone through way more than the 9 lives and come back each time. But it is fair to say that we work in a mature field, and so that's something we'll all have to take into account as we go forward over the next decade or so. In part, that's because we've been too successful, we collectively. We sort of solved the problem. We lived for decades under the practical version of Shannon's theorem, and the practical version says that almost all codes are good codes except the ones we could think of. And we were paid quite well and had enjoyable careers to keep thinking of more codes, and then we made the mistake of actually thinking of some very good ones and sort of put an end to the problem. Now capacity achieving or capacity approaching codes are readily available, and even some very low complexity codes are within a dB of the Shannon limit. So that's resulted in somewhat of a reduction of job opportunities in information theory, coding, and communication theory. On the positive side, however, it has produced some new approaches to our research. We find that by assuming the existence of a true capacity achieving code, that we can perform some analysis tasks and in other cases greatly simplify some simulations by using those codes, avoiding the simulation, say, at an iterative decoder with all of its complexities, or if you go back way in history, avoiding the complexities of a sequential decoder simulation. And so we can often replace these time-consuming simulations with analysis or at least some more efficient simulations. Any discussion of communication theory research in academia has to talk about the publication process, because all of us have to go through that. One of my mentors at University of Illinois was Mac Van Valkenburg. You may know Mac from, the older people may know Mac from his networks books, and no, those are not communication networks. Those are the old-fashioned networks, electronic networks. But you may also know him from the fact that one of IEEE's major education medals is named after him. So this person who was well known for his contributions to education, his formula for promotion was as follows. For each faculty member, a technical paper in a journal counts +1, a technical paper in a conference counts 0, and a paper on education counts -1. Well, for many years, I think the administrators could largely rely on paper counts for the promotion process. But with the advent of online journals, that's just totally bogus these days, as we all know. Furthermore, we have new departments have shown up on some of our campuses in engineering education, where all the faculty members are accumulating Van Valkenburg points at the rate of -1 per paper and still getting promoted. So things have changed considerably. In the IT newsletter in March 2012, I'll quote Tony Ephraimides, who said, "The number of journals is increasing by the day, while the quality control of the exercise is clearly diminishing." End of quote. This has caused an increase in job creation in the pool for editors, associate editors, and reviewers. But unfortunately, I think most of us have observed that the talent pool has not increased at the same rate, and therefore we're having a bit of a problem in the reviewing process these days and in the editorial process. Online journals have certainly opened the floodgate to publications. Journal publication counts are no longer relevant. Once, when it was a big honor to be invited to write a paper for a good journal, now we're getting invitations to write papers, and in addition to it, they're willing to pay you for it in some of the online journals. Some of the journals are out there trying to attract highly cited authors and offering couple $1,000s honorarium for writing a paper. I grew up under in the regime of the McLeese theorem. The McLeese theorem says that given paper P, there is journal J that will publish P. The current version is, given paper P, there are 100 online journals that will publish P, and that's without review. So things have definitely changed, and it's not clear over the next decade how our university administrations are going to deal with this issue, but it is going to affect all of the researchers in academia in communication theory as well as in other areas. Among my most rewarding research experiences were the ones in which I was able to find a counterpart in industry and work one-on-one with that person. It takes a unique match. You have to be able to understand the industry person's constraints and the rules under which that person operates. The person in industry has to be able to understand the research contributions, what they mean, and what effect they can have. These kind of relationships are difficult to develop, but I found them to be very rewarding, and I think it's well worth the effort to try to find such a match and strike up a long-term relationship, and I think it will pay off huge dividends for you in the future. So I would encourage you to explore that approach. I had a very good relationship with Jim McChesney of ITT over a number of years, and it worked out to our advantage. I started way back with the Singars radio in the early days and then followed it through other radio programs that ITT was involved. So I strongly recommend it. I'll stop at that point and turn it over to Mike.
Next panelist was drafted onto the panel 5 minutes before the start. Mike Fitz, yeah, it doesn't say your name.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Mike is currently with Trellisware, where he's a director.
All right, thanks. I think it may be, for those of you who have no experience, have limited experience, it might be useful to give my background a little bit. I have been an academic, so I can speak in some ways to the academic experience, but I left academia, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And I left academia and went so I was a full professor at UCLA, and I left academia to go into industry because to me, it really felt like I wasn't getting the kind of jobs and the kind of things that I wanted to in academia. And so I'll give you a little bit of my perspective about why I did that and why I think that there's some, where I think our research should go, and sort of some of the limitations that are currently in the academic system to why research can't go that way. So, so what I would say is, I like working on engineering because, at least when I was introduced to the thing, it's really solving problems and solving problems that are real problems for people. And so that's sort of what got me into it. I just didn't want to do theory for theory's sake. I wanted to do, in some sense, theory to solve a problem. That was a useful tool to do it. And communications research was one of those things where you could immediately take a class and start applying it in your job. And I think that's the very interesting thing, at least in the communications, and CSI maybe has been very strong in getting that, is giving us that sense of, this theory, this mathematical basis we have is really important to solve these very important problems. I mean, Shannon was a mathematician, but think about the entire industry that's been spawned by Shannon and his theorems, and I think that's a powerful thing. So, the comment I would make, I went through the master's program here at USC, and I was working at Hughes at the time, and I took, I think, 9 classes for my master's degree. And by the time that it was a year after I got done with my master's degree, I had used every one of those classes in solving problems within my job, and it was like, wow. And then I started facing problems that I didn't know how to solve in my job, and in fact, many of those problems turned out to be in the area of synchronization. So you can imagine who I went to get my PhD from. I got it from Bill Lindsay. And, but that was the interesting thing, that I think I came into it, I saw math being applied to real problems and being able to solve things and seeing it really applied in real applications. So I was lucky enough to get an academic job. I went off, started doing research, and I'll echo many of the things that I heard Mike say, and it's a very frustrating thing because you started seeing this, I'm in the thing that hadn't been online journals yet, but I started seeing this paper count becoming important, and then the ability to sort of manipulate this paper count being there, and then working on problems that weren't necessarily problems that people are interested in, but problems that somebody could make up and solve. And that to me seemed, that's not why we're engineers. We're not trying to make up problems and show we can do interesting mathematical, manipulations on them, but you actually want to solve things. And so I actually had sort of this strange evolutionary path in my academic career, and I started being a communication theorist who started working on experimental systems. So I was lucky enough, Nambi's a lot more famous on space-time codes and all that stuff, but I was one of the people that started on space-time codes as well with Nambi in that same era. But to me, it was always like, well, yeah, this works if I have, this ideal independent channels and yada, 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 you can do all this stuff. But wait a minute, not all channels are going to be independent. Not all channels are going to be, there's real physics involved in radio propagation. And so how does that impact, what's going on? And so that was the sort of impetus, for me trying to get into experiments. If I want to do MIMO, I better build a MIMO system and see how MIMO channels really respond. And I think, so I think that was a thing. And what I came along with was that I came to the realization that there's a large part of academia that doesn't really care about I would say the scientific process. So we have a scientific process that is, you postulate a theory, and then you do an experiment to either validate that theory or go on, and come up with a better theory. And what I found was that academia just doesn't, continue on with that scientific process. It's more sort of, hey, I've got a theory. Hey, here's another theory. Hey, I got another theory. And they never did the validation process. It was a very interesting aspect. There was a paper published. It actually won an IEEE IT Best Paper Award about space-time coding of some sort. It won the paper. We actually built the system, field tested it. It performed very poorly, like 6 dB worse than a simple other coded scheme that was something different. Nobody cared, right? Because that was a good paper. That person was very, very famous, and he had done a lot of good things. So it's like that, not that feedback loop, and that's really that's one of the things that led me to realize that's the great thing about being in industry and where research can go in industry, because if I would produce a system that was 6 dB worse, my job would be gone pretty quickly. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of being in industry versus academia. You're held a lot more accountable to actually getting real gains on real systems. And so I like that. Let's see, I'll try not to go on too long. This is short is probably good. The other thing that I'd just like to say is, where are we going to go in the future? I can't say that I'd be, I can't see the future, but I think the things that seem really important is, wireless networking seems to be, how do you get that? I think, as Mike had said here, we sort of got the single point-to-point channel nailed pretty well. Even on very complicated channels, we can get pretty close to Shannon. What's interesting is when you put multiple users in there, when you start being able to cooperate, when you start being able to do those things, and I think there's still a lot of open problems and a lot of open issues in that area. I think those are going to be interesting problems to solve. And that interface between sort of the networking layer and the physical layer and how you optimize that seems to be an area that is very important. Another area I think is going to be important in communications is just really, as we start getting closer and closer to Shannon on simple channels, it's going to be getting closer and closer to Shannon on more complicated channels. And again, maybe this is my bias, but I think that's only going to happen with experimentation. You're going to say, hey, I've got an idea. If I go out and build it on a real system, does it work? Does it give me the performance I think it is? And then if it doesn't, what's wrong with my original theory? I mean, my theory is very good because it's a simplifying way to view a problem and to come up with a solution. But you need to validate your models and your theories, I think. And I think with that, since I really didn't prepare anything and this is all ad hoc, I think I'll shut up for a while. So.
Thanks, Mike. Our next panelist is Zhangjian Jia, who's with the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Delaware, where he is the Charles Black Evans Professor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is, as the chair said, Xianggun Xia from University of Delaware. It's really my honor and great pleasure to being here, able to be here, and also very happy being back. And thank you the organizer. Thank Aubrey inviting me here. Also, this year actually is my special year. I defended my PhD thesis in November of 1992, so exactly 20 years. So when I replied Aubrey about how the email, then I hesitated. So I may not be good one to tell the future, but I may I may want to share with you some of my study experience in USC 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. So this may be a little bit off the topic, but I also thought that, okay, this is not a global conference. so let me share with you some of my experience in study in USC. So I came from math major. I spent more than 10 years in mathematics, and when I came, I received my master's degree in mathematics, bachelor degree, of course. And the first semester when I was at USC, actually, I only took one class, which is communication theory. I thought I remember the course number, but after Morwin's talk this morning, I was confused. I thought the number I remembered was wrong, was taken by Morwin with different course number. So I must be wrong now. So actually, in the only course I took in the first semester, I got a B. And the midterm I had actually got 50 points, which 4 points is 100. So because I came from mathematics major, then one of the problems I remember I did wrongly. So it was taught by Dr. Weber. And the question was to derive from somewhere to somewhere. I was thinking, how can I derive here from the beginning to the end? I couldn't do it. Then after that, the professor told me that, why don't you apply a low-pass filter? Jesus, I was deriving from mathematics, from beginning to end. I couldn't get it if I didn't apply a low-pass filter. So I just got 50 points. And the final slightly little better, but still I cannot make an A. And remember that it's a graduate course, right? And so most people got an A, and I got a B. So that's the only course I took at first. Then I thought my mathematics was good enough, because I spent more than 10 years in mathematics, which was before Hui Yang joined. He got a PhD in mathematics. I thought my math was good enough then. So until I took Dr. Kumar's class, which is advanced topics in coding, which is I remember this course number correctly, 599. Then Jesus, I said, first time I learned the Riemann-Roch theorem from his class. This requires a lot of algebraic geometry stuff. I learned the genesis. And oh my God, I need to study math again. And so then I learned a lot math too. And now I feel lucky, which was 1991. If that was after the turbo code, maybe I couldn't learn it. So turbo code was 1993. So I don't know whether that course was offered after the turbo course or not. But there's a lot of mathematics involved, and I learned a lot there too. So yeah, that's again, that's my learning experience. And also, I was doing research. Sorry, I forgot. I was a Dr. Zhang's student and joined USC in 1990 and left in 1992. And the course I learned, the digital communications, actually from Dr. Webb, actually benefited me a lot. Actually, I'm teaching a part of the class now in digital communication in Delaware. And another part of the class in called detection theory, also from Dr. Webb's communication theory. So actually, I'm teaching two classes from a single course I learned in USC. In terms of future, I really don't know how, So most of you are much better, not much better than me. So it's hard. I don't know how, It's basically, I agree with other panelists who said maybe the channel, more complicated, it becomes more complicated. And I'm physical layer guy, so I don't know too much about the networking. And in terms of physically, the channel, when the bandwidth becomes high and the channel becomes more dynamic, more complicated, maybe signal processing can play some role. So, okay, I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
And our fourth panelist is Dr. Vijay Kumar, who's with the Department of Electrical and Communications Engineering at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, where he's currently the chairman and holds the Tata Chem chaired professor of the department and is also an adjunct faculty member here at USC.
Right. Thank you, Jean-Marc. First, I'd like to thank Obli for the invitation. It's very nice to be here, and whenever I come to USC, I always made to feel very welcome. And I have to say, I miss USC. I learned a lot from the people here because I was a student here, and it was a continuing experience being on the faculty and being in the company of all the CSI faculty members. Even the students were great. So it was a very formative period for me. So it's always very nice to come back. Okay. What did I want to say? Okay, so now on to the topic, which is future of communications research in industry and academia. So I guess they say that predictions are always difficult, especially about the future. So I guess that's the situation I find myself in. But I've been thinking a little bit in this direction, and I think it's similar to what Mike had actually said, that communications is a mature field. And for long, we have, I'm sorry, I'm using my PowerPoint slides because I find it easier to talk off them. For long, we've enjoyed the support of society because ubiquitous communication was viewed as a challenging problem with a highly desirable outcome, objective. But that objective has now been met. So from a layman's point of view, you can communicate with anybody, anywhere, almost, with high speed. And you can get whatever information you want from the internet, which you can think of as Encyclopedia Earth or something like that. So in the past, just by working in the field, we were automatically working on problems that had a high societal impact. But in the future, we'll have to work harder to identify problems that are both theoretically challenging, that draw upon tool sets that we possess, and that also have societal impact. And all of this is because we are, in a sense, a victim of our own success, as Mike had said. Some evidence of the diminished societal impact, for example, if you look at the NAA list of grand challenges that USC hosted that meeting, you don't find communications listed there directly. And another point to note is that the impact of an advance in communication should be measured against corresponding advances in other fields. For example, you could do research into how the brain functions and how the brain interprets signals, how does it store data, convert impulses into stored data. And those potentially have, can make a greater impact than something that we might be able to do if we only make a marginal improvement in our ability to communicate. But on the other hand, there are items on the list of the National Academy of Engineering's grand list where we can contribute. It talks about improving urban infrastructure, advancing health informatics, engineering better medicines, reverse engineering the brain, securing cyberspace, enhancing virtual reality. So I think these are some areas where we can actually make some progress. So what is the suggested plan of action? I think that what one might want to do is keep societal impact in mind in selecting problems to work on, and also in deciding which courses to offer. Of course, I want to say that the community is working on a host of interesting problems, but they vary in the extent of their societal impact. So if you're working on something that will increase our ability to communicate by a very large factor, okay, that's great. That's certainly useful. But if it's going to make a marginal improvement, then perhaps it's not so great. I won't list specifics here. One other thing that I feel is important is that in our curriculum, I think we should incorporate tool sets from other disciplines which will help us move forward. And I noticed that computer science has, teaches a course on machine learning. And these days, with all the talk about the Internet of Things, body area networks, cyber-physical systems, you need to be able to take measurements from sensors and make decisions. And often what the sensors give you are signals where you don't have an analytical model for the signal. The best you can do is get the best signal that you can, and then turn it over to a machine learning algorithm which can actually do classification, clustering, whatever. But the machine learning classes typically are taught in computer science. But I think they should be taught within electrical engineering also, because I think that that's an area which we would like to have a strong presence. Similarly, security is important, privacy is important, that several talks mentioned that. So I think that cryptography also should find a home in electrical engineering, whereas often the home is in computer science. So I think these are two subjects that we might want to keep closer to us. I think with that I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. Okay, at this point, excuse me, I'd like to open it up for question and dialogue with the audience. Questions? Sir? Let me go.
I'll go back to the first speakers, Mike Persley. I'm interested in if you have I agree with you have a problem now with all this peer review system, the excess of journals. I see sometimes, for example, look at communication conference, sometimes we have deadlines which are 3 weeks apart, where you see 7,000 papers being submitted, and how can you do a good review on that? Similarly now for journals, the number of journals is growing. So you have any, so in my opinion, this system is breaking down. We have 7,000 papers to be reviewed in 10 weeks. Several of the professors are going to use graduate students. Graduate students typically have a narrower view of the field. They still have developed, mature in the field. So reviews are not so good. And that also happens sometimes with journals because the professors don't have time. So do you have any suggestions for how you can guarantee the future quality of publications?
Well, in the old days, say the Information Theory Symposium, for example, the program committee consisted of about 12 people, something like this, and then it's grown considerably. But if you had the same caliber people as in that 12, and you had them take a quick look at the papers within their area, make some very quick binary decisions. This paper should not take up reviewer time. This should not take up editor time. Let's just get rid of it and focus on papers that do have some merit. We can maybe get rid of that load. If people who are submitting inferior papers get enough rejections of that sort, perhaps they'll quit flooding the market with papers. I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult problem. I don't propose to have the complete solution, but I think we need to try to put our faith in very good people in the fields represented by that conference, to let them make some initial decisions, which ones are worthy of review, which ones should just be rejected outright. Cut the number down to something manageable, and then go forward with that.
I think that's kind of idealistic. I think that's a little idealistic because, I mean, the usual tendency is for people to gravitate into cliques, essentially, and those people declare themselves experts, if you will, and I mean, there seems to be a competition of sorts, and I mean, you talk as though there's a way of being objective and evaluating these things, and it's usually a pretty long process for somebody to be vetted, I would say. And but I really do agree with what you said, that like a way of getting more interesting problems is to work with somebody in the real world, and essentially the gentleman next door said the same thing. And Dr. Kumar, I think, made a good point, because if you look at medicine, the field of medicine, I live in Hawaii, and a lot of my neighbors are doctors, and I see some of the things they're doing, and they're working with Doppler all the time, and time delays, and all kinds of distortions in the signal, and, you know, trying to make, looking at measurements, and trying to draw important conclusions from those things. So you could, a lot of people are, I think we have a pretty good theoretical basis for doing all these things that other people, this is like a universal basis, and a lot of people probably aren't aware of this. They're just stumbling along, figuring things out on their own, because they haven't had the courses that we get from people like Dr. Schultz.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to make one comment about that. And I think one of the things that, not only do we need a better review process, as Mike has pointed out, but I think we need to basically stop paper publication being a metric with which we judge faculty members, because, you know, I mean, you know, I went through the same situation. You know, when I went through tenure, they said, hey, get this number of papers and you'll be guaranteed tenure. I said, okay, I'm going to go get those number of papers. Well, the first thing you have is somebody saying, well, if you know, I'll make up a number. If 10 is good, 20 is better. And if 20 is better, then 30 must be even better, right? And so somehow by judging people in an academic environment by the number rather than the quality of the papers, then that's what causes this arms race to happen. And I think we'd be better off if somehow in academia we could take a look at how to evaluate quality research. So
I claim we've had that in the past. I had a dean who, when asked how many papers does someone have to publish to be promoted in this department, he said, one, at least one. So if you're willing to look at the quality of the paper, if it's truly outstanding, one should be enough. But the current administrators in most universities don't see things that way.
So I want to pick up on a couple of the themes. I think one thing about, when you think about the future and the way things are going to go, you have to remember who's going to be running the show in the future. It's not us. It's our kids and our students. And I'll make a prediction that in 30 years, when we have the CSI 60th anniversary reunion, there won't be this notion of peer-reviewed IEEE transactions. It won't be our primary forum for scientific exchange. I think a good example is, and this isn't my example, this is from I think it's from the Shallows book by Nick Carr, is if you look at Encyclopedia Britannica, which is what, when I was a kid, when you wanted to learn something, you went to the library, you dug up Encyclopedia Britannica, and you read the article on whatever kind of fish or whatever you're interested in, and it had been triple checked, and it was known to be factually true. Now, we don't have that anymore. We have Wikipedia, right? Well, Wikipedia takes 2 seconds to get to, but it may be wrong, right? and so that's our trade, right? And so what kind of intellectual skills will our children and our students need in the future? I think there will be two types of extremes. There'll be people that are very good at determining what's good, where's the wheat from the chaff. So this goes to Mike Fitz's comments about all this work being done. And then there'll be some people that are very good at looking at a very wide range of work being done and realizing, there's a nugget there. And this nugget means that I can start the next Google or Yahoo or whatever. And I think those people also gravitate to leadership positions in departments that will help with this evaluation of promotion and tenure. And then I think you'll have other people that gravitate towards deep specialization, making deep contributions without a lot of concern for recognition broadly across the community. So that's sort of my prediction. I believe that you'll have essentially like archives, and we see it now, right? A lot of communities, by the time something gets published, it's already been sorted out by the community through the archives. We also see certain blogs that are extremely popular. They're technical blogs, like Terrence Tao's blog at UCLA. So, I mean, I see a situation where, I hate to say it, and it's not something I would like to see necessarily, but again, I'm not running the show in the future, where essentially things will just get liked up, right? So you post something, and if it's good, people will like it. And then it's kind of like going to Reddit for communication theory or machine learning or information technology, and it will be sorted by the masses essentially, including us. So, and then it's going to be our job and our intellectual task is to figure out when the greater community got it wrong. So.
I have maybe one comment in particular about conferences, and I'm saying that as now TPC chairing a conference with 2,500 papers. So the issue for me is conferences seem to have evolved from what they were originally intended, namely as a venue where you could get together and discuss, to a venue of publication. And I think that's one of the key reasons why there is now so many conferences, because it essentially gives people an additional outlet for publications, and usually one that has a lower threshold, in particular if you're looking at some of the conferences. I'm sure everybody has received these emails from, what is it called, GEST, your paper has been accepted, and you have never sent any paper to them. So that's always a very interesting experience. But I'm wondering whether it might actually be useful to go back to the old model of a conference, of saying you just go there for the purpose of discussing, of presenting your work, of getting feedback, and if you want to publish something, well, you're going to write a journal paper about it. Just throwing this out here as one thought or as one idea.
Let me just go to the panelists for a moment, see if you want to remark on any of that.
Well, if you would follow the Van Valkenburg formula, you would not get any credit for that conference paper, so people wouldn't use it just as an avenue to build up the resume. But unfortunately, it's not followed most places these days.
This is a question for the second speaker. It happens not to be about papers. In a similar vein to what your experience has been, most of the interesting problems I've worked on have come from outside academia, and yet I've had an association with people who were inside academia who helped me do that. So the question is, how can we bring these sort of real-world problems into academia to train the students, but also, should we even try to do that? Perhaps the student days is the time when we should be nailing down our understanding of the theory and not worrying that much about real problems. I'd be interested, since you've been on both sides, on what your feelings are about that.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with your last statement. The student years are the time to get the fundamentals down, because you don't get those very easily in industry. If you have some basic mathematical principles you need to know for a discipline, you better learn those while you're in college. It's a whole lot easier. and you can pick up the applications kind of as you go. But I don't know that, you know, they've tried various mechanisms to force academia and industries together with ERCs and various things like that. I'm not sure any of them have actually worked very well. It's kind of up to the individual faculty member to go out and seek avenues for interaction with industry, take the initiative and go do it, and then by the same token, maybe we could encourage industry people to seek out people from universities with whom they could work and cooperate. And it doesn't always require funding.
Yeah, I guess I would make the following comment is I completely agree. The time to get your fundamentals is in your graduate education, and because once you get in, you know, things move pretty fast in industry, and you don't have a time to go back and read a textbook to understand a theory. So I think it is true. To me, the one thing I would recommend, if I could, and you know, nobody's going to listen to me, but I'll say it anyway since I'm sitting up here on the panel, since Lubli put me up here, I really think that's what's missing in communications research, especially because it is something so close to practice, is the scientific method, right? So if I had really good friends when I was in academia that were in physics, and they were theoreticians, and they were experimentalists. And the experimentalists were funded at a very large level, and the theorists weren't funded at a very large level. Why? Because it takes a lot to implement experiments. It doesn't take so much to implement theory. And the interesting, you know, I had an interesting exchange, and it was like when the theorists came into the reviewing panel, the guys kicked back and started reading their email and doing everything because, you know, these guys were taking up $100K of their money or something. And then when the experimentalists came in, they were $1 million grant, and they were spending lots of, you know, they were wanting to know everything they did. But so what happens in communications is everything is funded at the same level. So there is no incentive to do experimental research. And if I could make a recommendation that I think would put us a little bit more in this area is fund at a level that could allow it to happen in a realistic manner, experimental research in our scientific community within engineering and within that, you know, so that's something I would recommend National Science Foundation take on, is actually be willing to do real experimental research within an academic environment. That's not happening now, and it's a real disincentive for anybody in academia to really try to take on experimental research. You know, that's why I left. I could be in a company. You know, to me, to the company, $1 million is nothing. To an academic researcher, $1 million is way more money than he could possibly hope to get from an NSF grant in a year, right? So the scales.
Well, NSF probably will say they're doing that through their test bed programs, but I think the test bed programs need to be revamped.
So I wanted to have actually two comments. The first, two unrelated comments. The first one is on the related topics of machine learning. I also run into a number of different problems where we really have to use techniques from machine learning. For example, in the following on the talk that we have, if I know that a signal come through the wall, I can use it in one way as opposed to line of sight. So you can you can use a machine learning algorithm to figure out whether the signal has come through the wall or a bounce, or et cetera, et cetera. So I'm in all favor of that, and to me it's rather than bringing it to electrical engineering department is important, but I think more pragmatic approaches to be sure to tell our students that this really is a useful class so that they can go take a class. I think that's sort of been techniques that been working out for me because there are classes out there. And also the expertise and professors and textbooks are there in the, let's say, CS department. So it's just telling your student saying this is a useful thing. The other comment I have is on this publishing business. I'm sort of a middle ground. So just at USC, I was never taught that you have to publish a lot of papers. In fact, I remember going to Dr. Schultz with my part 1 and part 2 paper, and he told me after 20 days of reading, he says, you got to combine it. So he encouraged us to do the other direction. But I do agree that, you know, by and large, the whole world is going into a bean counting business. And so what I tell my students is that, well, you know, this is the world of bean counting business, but be sure that you have a few jewels to count too. And so just try to encourage your students or colleagues and so on to produce good quality results, whether it's experimental or whether it's theoretical or whether it's both. But you wanted to encourage them and make sure that they understand that that's what you will really need at the end.
I hear this complaint of the bean counting all over. And it's what surprised me, and then I got to put a challenge to you. Why don't you change? I mean, you keep saying that someone is doing that, but someone is probably someone yourself at some point, or some colleague of yours who grows to be an evaluation committee. And then for some reason, everybody accepts something which seems to be wrong. So, I mean, I'm sure that you guys sitting go to NSF panels, evaluation panels to evaluate projects. Why don't you use a different criteria? Why don't you use a criteria to the best papers? So somehow there's something wrong. Instead of fighting, you absorb the criteria and then you push others to do the same, including IEEE pushing Open More Conference, they're all excited about the acceptance ratios. They want to know. That doesn't indicate anything, because I mean, if the review process is bad, the acceptance ratio doesn't mean anything. So why there's a push back to go into some really quality evaluation as opposed to being counted? I don't understand that, because everybody seems to blame someone at somewhere, God, for that. And as a matter of fact, it's us. We are the ones sitting on these panels. We are the ones sitting in evaluation panels at the university. We are the ones implementing these criteria. So why can't we change?
Well, I suspect everybody up here would agree with you, but we're in the minority is the problem. So we're pushing, but you know, for every one of us, there's 100 others.
No minority here, but if you go into an equation society all together, say, okay, let's go back to our universities and do it different. When you sit at an NSF panel, we're going to do it differently. Eventually, we're going to change it.
I mean, I think it's human nature. I mean, in some sense, if you succeed in a way, you want to propagate that. So the people who are succeeding and have succeeded in publishing lots of papers, they like the system. It worked for them.
You're right. Most of the people are irrelevant. It's just academic exercise.
Yeah, and so I unfortunately, you know, I don't know how. I struggled with it for a long time. I obviously was not very comfortable in the academic environment and left, but I understand what you're saying, and I really can't figure out a way that works. So.
Maybe I'll just add a quick comment to that. So I think that I agree that there's too much publication going around, and I think that what counting publications does is that it's an easy way out of making a measurement. The right thing to do is to actually read the papers. And yes, I was involved in a recent meeting 2 weeks ago, and there was one person with 10 publications, one student, and another with 3, and we had to make a judgment. We didn't have time. We voted for the one with 10. And there was some discussion, shall we spend another week and read the papers? But nobody had time. But that's something, yes, we are guilty and we should do it. But I think the other thing is that we can't do it alone. I think it has to be done at a larger scale, like at a conference, because if my student, if I don't encourage him to publish, when he goes out on the job market looking for jobs, somebody else will have more publications. So it has to be done at a slightly higher level, but I completely.
I wanted to go back to exploring this tension between, maybe not tension, potential opportunity between how research seems to be evolving in academia versus industry, and make a couple of comments. So, Mike, you talked about the lack of experimental communications, and certainly at USC we've had this experience where we've tried to have experimental facilities as theorists be funded, and what we've seen, or at least I, stepping back and looking at my colleagues, is that the people now who are funding, say, the software-defined radio testbed is actually industry. that there's this clear observation or agreement that we need to have these kinds of facilities and that theorists like ourselves should be engaged in it. And clearly, the larger agencies aren't doing this. But it's even bigger than that, because if you look at the funding agencies, we're being encouraged to go into very interdisciplinary activities. And I don't say that this is definitely a bad thing, but me looking at how biological systems communicate, it's not clear how that's going to impact industry medium term or long term, right? So there's this definite divergence between what one organization or set of organizations is encouraging us to work on and what I would say industry wants us to work on. And I think the divide is getting larger. So this is addressed to all four of you.
Unless you have some very compelling thing to say, I would like to follow up right away. Can I? Because I was, what I wanted to say is really fits very well with what you just said. So I have the following impression, that communications as a research field has been declared mature, dead, or not in a good health, because somehow, on one hand, there is a sort of dichotomy between in research in academia and industrial reality, and this is due to the fact that communication systems are very large systems. They necessarily need to be standardized, and essentially the real world, quote unquote, has been hijacked by these large standardization bodies. Like 3GPP is the epitome of this thing, right? So a bunch of guys who get together, they're extremely big guys, and agree on some kind of very suboptimal solution just because it's a patent fight. There is absolutely almost no science there. They agree on the most idiotic way of comparing systems, as long as all companies have their own little share in it, and there is no company that comes up with, say, a dominant technology. And in other words, this is a disincentive to be smart. If you are very smart, you are out of the market. Say, for example, I don't want to name companies here, especially companies who didn't sponsor us, but let's name one. So, Qualcomm has the smartest idea, but it's Qualcomm against everybody else. This idea will not be adopted, okay? Because otherwise, this gives a dominating edge in the market. Everybody has to pay royalties to Qualcomm. Everybody gets very upset, and so this is really a disincentive to be smart, disincentive to do science. On the other hand, this also creates this very disappointing situation for which very smart people do research, come up with great ideas that would call for a non-standardized proprietary solution somewhere that clearly either you target like a niche market or you are out of business. So somehow we are relegating ourselves into a sort of ideal world where they, even though you come up with the best possible software radio testbed and you actually demonstrate your idea are great and you gain this much, is extremely yet difficult to make an impact because of this. And the other thing that is following what Ubli just said is that for some strange reason that I don't know, or maybe I know, but the funding agencies have been instructed or conditioned, or I don't know what kind of lobbying activity has been behind that, for which, first of all, we have to be interdisciplinary. And this interdisciplinary doesn't mean to be good. I mean, you can be very lousy and be interdisciplinary. Just you know, mix up things and do some lousy job. It doesn't mean that interdisciplinary automatically means high quality. And then it looks like NSF, DARPA, and they struggle to find the craziest possible problem definitions that are complete nonsense. If you don't, with those buzzwords like cyber this and cyber that. There may be very good science here, okay? There may be very good science, but come on, define the problems or make a challenge how to define the problems. But it looks like they always have, there are these program directors who always have some ideas that are undefined, extremely complicated to explain. You read the BAA, it's a nonsense. And then the smart people struggle to make a sense out of it. So a typical example, forgive me, I don't want to offend anybody, but since this is a, let's make it controversial. Typical example is cognitive radio. Okay, cognitive radio is really the, I think we should be all very ashamed of cognitive radio. How this cognitive radio came about? From a master thesis of a guy in some Swedish university. Okay? No. It was, read the thesis is a total nonsense. Is all done, there is not even an equation in the whole thesis. And then somebody jumped on the idea and said, oh, this is a really cool idea. Oh, adapting transmissions to the channel. And come on. Shannon, adapt your, when you calculate capacity, you're essentially adapting your input distribution to the channel, and is something we have done all the time, but it's just another name. And then people start struggling and make sense out of it, and then now we have information theoretic cognitive radio models, and that are, again, completely different from what was in the mind of the guy who coined the term, and completely different with what is in the mind of the people who talk about dynamic spectrum and all these things. So it looks like, I don't know, we are all living in a bubble, and somehow we have lost this contact. We have like, the real world has been hijacked by the standardization committees, and then the funding outside industry is hijacked by people that come up, that fall in love with the acronyms or, I don't know, buzzwords. And then there are the serious scientists who essentially struggle to make a living and try to make a sense out of these things by giving meaning to things that are intrinsically meaningless. This is...
I think you just took on the whole industry and all of academia and all the funding agency at one time. So congratulations.
So I completely, just as a comment to Giuseppe, I completely agree. There's a couple comments I would like to make, and so look at, I've sat in industry and got killed by standards. Okay, so I know what you're talking about. No problem there. So just in case I come off some other way, industry isn't perfect. So there's lots of foibles there as well as academia. But just to comment to what you said, somehow we've got to encourage. So when I put together a multidisciplinary team in a company, what do? I don't put together a team of people who are all multidisciplinary. I put together a team of experts in different disciplines, and I have to force them to act as a team together. And so what I see multidisciplinary research as an important thing because it teaches graduate students, if nothing else, that they need to work in teams. So I'd like to say, yes, it should be encouraged, multidisciplinarism. One of the things I think that's fundamentally wrong with the way we evaluate, and this goes back to the teaching, to the publication thing, is you get evaluated by metrics that are all very selfish. How did you do as an individual? How many papers did you publish? Whereas, getting together in a multidisciplinary team often doesn't result in these metrics that perform well on your vita. So I guess I'd like to encourage us to think, how do we get academic experts to work together, individual experts to work together on multidisciplinary problems? You could have some really, and I think we have lots of examples where that has been very productive. What we don't want is a bunch of people in academia who are jacks of all trades and don't have depth in any of them. That's not an effective academic way to do the thing. So I completely agree. And the thing that I think academia does that industry never does is being able to look at problems in depth. You know, that's in industry. You know, I've been on plenty of DARPA panels, and what I said is, you know, God, what we need is a really good academic to come in here and look at this problem instead of these bozos who are in there who don't know anything, right? And it's true, right? I mean, you know, you say you want to look at a problem in depth, and you can't because you're trying to figure out what all these buzzwords mean and how they go together. Well, that is a problem. That is a real problem, and I think we need to figure out how we fund research in ways that encourage, you know, this to be a, you know, to really be you know, to fund real fundamental problems, yet to fund depth of research and fund, I mean, really, you know, let's be honest. I mean, I was an academic, and you know, I thought they were funding me because I was a great researcher, blah blah blah. But okay, I now know that isn't true. But what they're really funding is the training that you're giving your graduate students, and the fact that they're going to lead us to the economy of the next round. And that's, if we think about that, then we really want to be training these students in a fundamental way that is going to enable them to be the leaders of the economy going forward. I mean, I don't know how many students who have Wikipedia knowledge of communication systems that I would never hire to work on my thing. You know, that's why I want somebody from CSI, because I know they know fundamental things that they can solve problems. You know, that fundamental things you're not going to find on Wikipedia.
I wanted to make two partly related comments. The first one, I guess, is a little bit, is in partial defense of interdisciplinary work. And I think the point is, and I think we actually agree on that interdisciplinary work is valuable, but I think that it has to come out of the problem. And actually, at CSI, we've got a bunch of interdisciplinary collaborations going on with things that span 4 or 5 professors or 2 professors that are getting together and solving a problem. But there it is, the problem is there, and then we're thinking, what knowledge do we need to tackle it? And then we go out and tackle it together. And I think, for me, this is how interdisciplinary should work. It shouldn't be that the original goal is we want to do something interdisciplinary, and now we start to search on how we can put things together, or we know already what disciplines we have that we want to collaborate, and now we search for a problem that spans those disciplines. I think that's, for me, the important part of how that should work. The other topic I also wanted to mention is, because it's close to my heart, is about the connection between experiment and theory. And I actually very much agree with what Mike said about that this is very relevant. And again, I think this is something where CSI actually has done a lot of activities, both in the past and in particular in the past couple of years. So we've got now the radio test bed in which we can now investigate a lot of the theory that has been developed. We've got propagation channel measurement capabilities that are probably leading, at least in the country. We've got Alan Wilner's lab that has done so many world records. So I think we've got actually a very strong basis for these experimental things. And it's, but I agree that it's not easy to get funding at it, and I think we've all struggled in acquiring that. And the big problem is really to get industry, because for NSF it gets very, very difficult, but to get industry to say, yeah, we're going to plunk down this certain amount of money for the university to build up the test bed and this capability of actually demonstrating what has been developed theoretically. And I think in the long run, it's still saving industry a considerable amount of money. And I mean, I'm happy to say that there are a number of companies who actually have that and who are sponsoring this research and collaborating with us right now. But I think that as a general point of view, there's a little bit larger investment into the research at universities is somewhat missing. And I think in an age where most companies are so much looking for the next quarterly results, that is often a big issue, and I don't have a good answer on how that problem can be solved in general. But I think to deepen the understanding of, yes, what's invested right now will have payoff in 5 years, and that the payoff in 5 years still counts, I think that's something that would need to be pushed.
Well, lest we come off as a bunch of complainers, I'd like to make a comment. I think to the students I would say this: take your backgrounds that you're getting from USC, work hard to get yourself in a position, and it's possible to do this, where essentially you can do the work that you want to do, that you know is important, and that's what you're going to find to be rewarding. And it can be done. We can complain about the system has its flaws, but there are many of us out there who are pretty much free to do whatever research we want to do, pursue whatever lines we want to pursue, teach whatever courses we want to teach, so it can be done. And just get your background while you're here, develop your strengths. Take not only electrical engineering, take mathematics, physics, whatever your field might be. Get as much education as you can. If you can get some industrial experience along the way, that's nice, but it can be done. You can put yourself in a position to do what you think is important.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Mike said. I think if you're a well-trained comm system engineer, even if the field is dead, you've got a job. Yeah. I mean, we have, we have need for, at the company I work at, Trollsware, we have need for comm system engineers, and they better know their stuff, because we have to, I can't just hire somebody who says they have a master's from Wikipedia. I got to have somebody who knows what to do, right? And I think if you, I like to view it as job security for myself, because I view myself as somebody who knows a little bit of something about communications, and that guarantees I'll always have a job, because there is a need for it, and there aren't enough people out there that have the training that like we got it at CSI. So.
Yeah, I think communication becomes increasingly one component of big computing system. And it's almost taken for granted by society nowadays. I think one risk I see is that we cannot continue to walk in isolation. I think we need to cooperate more with people from CS, maybe from other disciplines. Nowadays, people talk about like Internet of Things, like big data and cloud computing. I think the trouble is, so how can we pick out theory out of this kind of buzzword? I mean, that's a big problem. I think we need a cloud channel in some sense.
My comment, or really a question, is given all of these challenges with respect to the field as a whole, what implication do the panelists and others think this has for PhD students looking to build an academic career? And is it becoming harder because maybe places are less likely to hire these days in a more traditional dying field than something that's that sounds cooler but maybe is not as well established?
Oh, that's so that's a hard question. I think PhD students graduate under a professor, and to some extent what they do is dependent on what the professor does. But I just wanted to correct one thing. I didn't mean to imply that communication theory is dead. I'm just saying that some parts of it are mature, and when you're working in the field, you should work on those aspects which will have an impact, which will make a significant difference. And if it's marginal, you may not get the recognition for all the effort that you put in. So that was the point. PhD students, I think they should just be aware of the situation and control it to whatever extent they can. But they are going to, perhaps they choose their advisor based on the field that the advisor is working.
Just for a second, I want to go back to standard industry and academia. So I start to attend some standard meetings unfortunately. And I can see, I agree with my advisor that, some discussions are really wrong. They don't make sense because there is just politics, so they don't make sense in terms of science. But so it is very hard to introduce a new topic to the industry people, especially the standard people, and expect them to agree and work on it, although they have PhDs, even from CSI. So, but what we can do, I guess, any PhD student in 3 or 6 months, if the resources are given, especially in terms of an internship, for example, they can easily introduce their ideas to the standards, at least to show more realistic results. That will maybe create some attention from industry. So I would suggest if a student has a great idea in paper, in theory, they should take maybe like a 6-month leave and go to industry and have an internship and show the world that it really works. And I think we should expect this from academia to standards because they won't come over here, so unfortunately, yeah.
Last question.
Although I don't know whether this is the last question, it's the last comment of sorts, I guess. And that is that I feel some of this discussion has been ignoring one of the things that universities ought to be doing, and that is digesting information, putting it in context, and making a very clear view of some of these fields and what results have been done in excellent survey papers by top people. And I think that would lay to rest a lot of these sort of warmed over discussions of the same system that you see coming up over and over again. A really good survey paper, I think, can cut down the number of reviews that you have to do in a given field, and I'd encourage people to do that more often.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that's a very good idea, and I know many of the journals are trying to encourage more survey papers, and they just have to continue to work hard. It's hard to get good people to take time to do these things. You can get lots of people to volunteer to give a survey, write a survey paper. The people who volunteer are probably not the ones you want. You want the people who don't have enough time already and they're already, working on so many things that are important, but you got to twist their arms.
Okay, thank you very much. We just have a round of applause for the panelists.